In the Galicia region, a man known as Manel was returning home with Julia, who was his wife. During the journey, she talked about her dream of being a mother, since Manel still hadn't given a clear answer about this subject, and she wanted a definition to organize her future plans. An argument started, and they both got distracted, so Julia had to quickly turn the steering wheel to avoid hitting another car approaching from the opposite direction. Unfortunately, their car stopped in the middle of the road and was suddenly hit by a giant truck that flipped the vehicle upside down. 12 months later, Manel, now living alone, lived only with his cat Luculo. On television, journalists were talking about the United Nations considering closing borders because an unknown disease was spreading. Prevention measures weren't working, and people were becoming aggressive at borders trying to flee. Manel was so deep in melancholy that he barely paid attention and then changed the channel. He didn't see the security footage from a hospital showing a patient gradually transforming into a creature. After that, Manel went out for a walk, watching an ambulance pass by. Many walls throughout the city had graffiti written saying that the end was near. Hey, what would you do if a deadly virus turned people into zombies and you had to survive alone in an apocalyptic world? The movie I'm going to summarize is called Apocalipsis Z El Principio del Fin. In English, Apocalypse Z, the Beginning of the End. It's a Spanish film that mixes horror, drama, and suspense. It's one of the most intense films about survival amid the zombie apocalypse that I've ever watched. That's why I invite you to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a like to receive the best recaps. Manel went to the dock to meet two women interested in acquiring his boat Corinto, which he hadn't used since his partner died. While searching for the boat's papers, Manel found Julia's bracelet and his head filled with happy and painful memories. On the way home, Manel received a phone call from his sister Belan, but didn't answer. He stopped at the market to buy food and noticed that everyone was buying much more food than usual, almost leaving the shelves empty. Later at home, he tied the bracelet around the cat's neck while listening on TV that the TSJ virus had arrived in Spain. During the early morning, Manel made a video call with his sister Belen, who had important news. Since her husband Mario was a police officer, the family was being moved to the Canary Islands and she invited him to go along, but Manel said no. At dawn, Manel saw that all the neighborhood residents were leaving, so he decided to do the same thing and took Luculo. During the trip, he heard on the radio that a new version of the virus was spreading through Europe. This change reduced the incubation time to just a few minutes and was transmitted through cuts and bites. At the airport, Manel sent a message to Belen saying he was going to meet the family after all. While people tried to board the plane, tickets were refused without reason, and the crowd started getting nervous, yelling at a worker who didn't know what was happening. All of a sudden, the electronic board announced that all flights were cancelled, and everyone received a message on their phones declaring a public safety alert. The crowd panicked, and some people tried to board the plane by force. Manel received a call from Belen, who told him to hide at home and not leave until they received more news. At that moment, a man grabbed a gun from the guards and threatened to shoot, so the crowd ran to leave the airport. Since everyone was trying to get home, Manel got stuck in traffic, and the radio reported that all roads and bridges were in the same situation. When military planes flew overhead, people started leaving their cars and arguing with other drivers. The news reported that military personnel were attacked, and the population revolted so much that several soldiers were injured. In the end, many drivers got tired of waiting, so they left their cars and walked away. Manel grabbed Luculo and decided to do the same. He arrived in his neighborhood when it was already night and saw that a group of military personnel had surrounded a building to set up a protective tunnel to a house. There were strange noises coming from there, and Manel was frightened when he saw two soldiers taking a sick creature out of the house through the tunnel while the woman cried for her sick husband outside. The patient was taken in a military vehicle while Manel noticed he knew that man. Later, Manel went home and went to sleep. That night, he had a dream about the accident and Julia's death. The next morning, Belen made a video call to Manel and told him they were preparing protected areas to relocate the population. But there were disagreements in the military because the more people they took, the greater the possibility of bringing the virus to the protected area, and other nations had already had problems trying to do this. She told Manel to stay home, no matter what happened, Soon all major cities were talking about total lockdown and weren't letting anyone seek shelter there, causing even more confusion in the streets. The virus was no longer being controlled, and people started seeing infected people eating people in the neighborhood, which they recorded for social media. Others made videos showing tips on how to make protections and defend themselves. That afternoon, the government declared a state of emergency and new rules came into effect. Every business had to close after 2 in the afternoon, and the population could be called by the military. The next time Manel went to the grocery store, there was almost no food, and people were grabbing from each other's hands. Manel grabbed what he could, and on the way out, he saw warplanes passing by. Then he stopped at the gas station store to get more things. At that moment, an injured police officer appeared, and after bumping into Manel, he locked himself inside the store, locking the doors with his handcuffs. Soon, more people appeared at the place, running and asking for help. Suddenly, an infected person jumped on another police officer and started eating his face. Manel grabbed a squeegee and prepared to fight, but when the infected person was almost reaching him, the fallen officer shot him, making infected blood splash on Manel's face. Inside the store, the first officer was banging on the glass as he started to change. A worried Manel wanted to check on the fallen officer, who shot at the ground to keep him away, afraid Manel was infected. After Manel left with his things, the officer ended his suffering. Later that day, the president finally appeared on TV and said there would be lockdown for longer. People who didn't help the military and their evacuation plans would have problems with the law. Following internet videos, Manel used his tools to reinforce the outside walls of the house and installed a camera to monitor. At night, the military arrived in Manel's neighborhood to take him away, but Belen sent a message saying to stay hidden and that she would come get him soon. Manel turned off the lights and hid with Luculo while listening to soldiers knocking on his door. Luckily, they didn't break it down and didn't see him through the window either, so they left. 2 weeks later, Manel was starting to run out of food and couldn't talk to his sister anymore because the service was down. After thinking a lot, he grabbed several tools to defend himself, covered his body with several layers of protection, and finally left the house. He entered several houses looking for food, but unfortunately found nothing. After a few hours searching, he entered a house where he found an old lady in a wheelchair named Gabriela, who said her husband and son left to look for a safe place and never came back. She also had no food, but told him which houses might have something, since she saw the neighbors who bought a lot of things before the lockdown. Manel visited all the houses on her list and finally started finding food and other useful things, including a motorcycle. Because of the motorcycle, Manel risked going farther and managed to get a good amount of food that he shared with Gabriela. He also gave her a radio so they could talk while he was out. Now only one house was left to visit, the one where the soldiers found the infected person. Manel didn't find food, but there was an aquarium with dead fish inside. Out of nowhere, he noticed someone behind him and immediately prepared to shoot, thinking it was an infected person. But it was just a regular man who ran away, immediately thinking Manel wanted to attack him. When Manel went to get the arrow that stuck in the cabinet, he found it full of food. Days went by, and Manel and Gabriela always met to eat together at night. On one of those nights, Manel drank too much and sent a message to Gabriela, saying he regretted not spending more time with his family. Then he had that dream about the accident again, remembering how they were taken to the hospital by helicopter. He woke up suddenly when Gabriela spoke on the radio for him to turn on the device. Manel turned it on and heard a voice saying they were sending survivors to the Canary Islands, so they gave coordinates for people to find this rescue group. Gabriela didn't believe them, but Manel said the food was running out. The group seemed to be at the Arusa estuary, and Manel said he could get there using his boat Corinto, but Gabriela said she couldn't go because she would be in the way. Manel didn't want to accept this and said he would take care of her. The next morning, Manel got worried when Gabriela didn't respond when he called. He ran to see how she was and discovered she had ended her own life. She left a note thanking him for the days they spent together and asking him to save himself. Returning home, Manel was attacked by surprise by an infected person who managed to take his weapon. After fighting for a while, Manel kicked the infected person and climbed on top of a car, but the infected person grabbed his leg to pull him down. The fight continued, and the infected person bit Manel's arm. Luckily, it didn't pierce the skin because of the protection he was wearing, even with the creature spitting blood in his face. Manel stretched his arm to open the car door and started hitting the infected person with it, making the head get stuck in the broken glass. Then he ran to get his weapon back and shot to kill the infected person right when she broke free. Then he took her document from her purse and placed it on her chest in case someone from the police found her. Later at home, he heated water to clean the weapon and sent another message to Belen saying he couldn't wait for her anymore, but the message wasn't sent due to no signal. So Manel left with Luculo on the motorcycle, riding very fast through the empty streets. At one point, he found a fence blocking the way, so he had to go through the woods. There he was surrounded by the infected, who weren't fast enough to catch him. Sometimes they tried to jump, so Manel had to be smart to dodge. When he found an abandoned campground, he was afraid of what might be there, but there was no other way. He started going through there, and a bunch of infected people came out with the noise, so Manel started riding faster to dodge all of them and not hit anything. He managed to get through the area without being bitten and reached another street, only to find a bunch of bodies blocking the way. Manel was going too fast to stop in time and ended up falling off the motorcycle. Luckily, Luculo was safe in his box. Hearing the infected getting close, Manel got on the motorcycle again, but it didn't work, so he had to run. He went through the woods as fast as he could, with the infected almost breathing down his neck. At one point he reached the port, and when he crossed the bridge, he closed the gate behind him. The infected immediately started banging on the glass until it broke, and they passed through too. But by then, Manel went through a stronger gate and finally managed to escape. At first, Manel thought hope was lost because he saw that all the boats had disappeared from the port. But after looking around, he found an abandoned boat far out in the water. Manel swam there and tested the engine, but the boat didn't start. At that moment, he heard a noise and opened a door to find an infected baby strapped in a chair. Then, Manel and Luculo left on a small raft. Manel wanted to get to where he could get a radio signal to send a message to his sister, but he was devastated. No matter how far he got from the shore, the signal didn't reach. Even so, he didn't stop recording messages for his sister. During the night, the raft stopped halfway. Manel went to see what had happened with the engine and found a body tangled in it. That's when he saw a strong light approaching and started waving his arms, calling for help with shouts. It was a boat with sailors from Russia who agreed to take him along. Manel and Luculo went inside a large ship and got food. The only guy who knew how to speak Spanish was named Victor, who told him that the Canary Islands had been isolated and the police wouldn't let survivors leave the boats, which is why there were so many infected on land. Manel got a room after he promised to help them look for important things in the morning. In the middle of the night, Manel heard voices and looked out the window. He saw some survivors on a small boat screaming for help. The next day, Manel asked about the new people who had arrived, but Victor said no one had shown up the previous night. Then Manel was called to Captain Ushakov's room to show on the map where important buildings were, like hospitals and factories. Later, he discovered that the boat he had seen at night was on the ship and the crew had the survivors' things. He asked Victor about this, but he didn't want to answer. Since Victor was a pilot, Manel said he knew where there was a helicopter, but Victor told him to be quiet and stop asking questions. At night, Manel took a look around and realized the ship was loading all the small boats that the crew had taken from random people. He gathered his things and put Luculo in his backpack to escape from the ship. Manel ended up finding a room at the bottom of the ship. Down there, he found 2 survivors tied up. Manel quickly untied the first man, but when he stood up, a guard shot and he fell. At that moment, Victor appeared and tried to take the gun from the guard, so they fought over the gun and accidentally it fired, breaking things around. The men started fighting and Victor managed to get a rope to tighten around the guard's neck until he died. Now Victor also wanted to escape and agreed to look for the helicopter. Manel, Victor, and the other survivors slowly made their way to a small boat. When they were leaving, 2 guards started shooting, killing the survivor. As the boat left, Victor shot back, but took a shot to the shoulder. Manel made the boat go very fast to escape before they died. Shortly after they arrived at the beach, and Manel helped Victor walk, they found several cars and an infected person trapped inside one that Manel quickly killed. Then the 2 men and Luculo left by car to look for the Meixoeiro hospital where Julia had died because Manel remembered there was a helicopter there. On the way, Victor told him that Captain Ushakov was a very bad guy who was making a safe place on an island. He only let people live there who worked for him, so all women and children were taken to serve him. When they finally arrived at the hospital, Manel was devastated to see that the helicopter wasn't on the roof. Suddenly, an infected person jumped on top of the car, so Manel started driving like crazy to get him off. Then he used Victor's weapon to kill him, and the noise called more infected people that Manel also killed quickly. Then, the men and Luculo entered the hospital, and Manel looked for something he could use to remove the bullet from Victor's shoulder. At that moment, he heard voices coming from the first floor, so Manel went up. He saw an infected person walking and hid before being seen. Then he heard voices coming from the pipes, so he talked to them until another infected person appeared behind him. Manel quickly pushed him and killed him with a shot, but more infected people came through the doors. He ran back to the room where he was before and closed the doors tight so the infected couldn't get through. To Manel's surprise, Victor and Luculo weren't where he had left them. When he turned around, a passage opened and Lucia told him to come with her. They both closed the passage and left well before the infected knocked down the other doors. Manel was taken to a hospital room where Nurse Lucia and Sister Cecilia were with Victor, Luculo, and 3 children, Iria, Layla, and Max. The women took care of Victor's wound and made him better. When Manel talked about the helicopter, Lucia told him it was parked behind the hospital in the isolation area, which was full of infected people. During that dark night, the group shared the small amount of remaining food with Manel, who couldn't stop thinking about his wife. He walked to the room where she had died and remembered the final moments they spent side by side. He also took Luculo's bracelet and tied it to the bed where Julia used to sleep. When day broke, Manel went up to the roof to watch the infected, and suddenly his phone caught a signal, so all the messages Belin had sent during the last weeks arrived. While Manel was preparing a recorded response, he heard gunshots and looked down to discover that Ushakov's men were eliminating infected people to get into the hospital. Manel quickly ran to warn the group about the approaching threat, so they decided to try using the back of the hospital to get to the helicopter. The back was full of corpses and thick smoke, so everyone had to cover their mouths and noses while walking. Unfortunately, the door was stuck and they had to hit it with an axe to open it. An infected person appeared and lunged at Cecilia, trying to bite her. Manel pushed him away and burned his face against a very hot pipe before Lucia finished him off with the axe. Now Cecilia had been infected, so she asked them to continue the journey without her and walked away. The group reached a hallway and found some infected people hidden behind some furniture. Lucia managed to open the door without making a sound, but a child spoke when she noticed her mother was one of the infected. Luckily, they weren't heard and continued walking to the door, only for an infected person to suddenly knock down some shelves. The sound alerted the other creatures, so Manel hid with the child inside a cabinet while the others stayed on the other side of the door. The infected started banging on the cabinet, and for a moment it seemed the end had come for Manel. But the men from the ship arrived and took down all the infected in a few minutes. After a quick conversation, they left without noticing Manel was in the cabinet. Now the group could finally reach the final door and saw all the infected outside. Remembering the instructions he saw on the internet, Manel gathered several cages and they used them as protection to cross the courtyard. At first it worked, but when a wheel got stuck, the noise caught the attention of the infected. Lucia used her axe and Manel grabbed a fire extinguisher to keep them away while Victor continued pushing the cages. They moved very slowly, but with great effort, managed to reach the gate. Lucia broke the chain with her axe and stayed with Manel to keep the infected away while Victor ran with the children toward the helicopter. After much effort, Lucia and Manel managed to close the gate and lock it with a cloth, then ran to find the others. Victor tried to start the helicopter, but it didn't work, and the infected were starting to climb the fence, so Manel went out to face them. At that moment, Victor found a disconnected wire and reconnected it to finally get the helicopter working. The engine noise caught the attention of the ship's men, who appeared in the courtyard and started eliminating infected people. They cut the cloth to open the gate and threatened to shoot the group if they didn't cooperate. Victor carefully signaled to Manel, who broke another chain to open a second gate. A new crowd of infected people ran into the courtyard and quickly surrounded the ship's men to bite them. Some infected also approached the helicopter, so Victor made it fly low to scare them away. Manel cleared a path through the crowd, eliminating infected people with the axe. The helicopter was ready to leave, but after all the infected were taken down, Lucia threw down a ladder and Manel immediately climbed up it to meet his new companions and Lucula. A few hours later, the helicopter was getting close to the Canaries. At that moment, Manel received a call from Belen asking him not to go. 2 fighter jets flew nearby, confirming that the islands were also infected. And so the film ends. What rating would you give this movie? The film ends without resolving the group's fate, clearly establishing that this is only the beginning of the end, as the title suggests. There's a whole world of horror yet to be explored, and our survivors are far from finding peace or safety. Don't forget to turn on notifications to be notified of new summaries. So until next time,